Welcome everyone to the webinar, It Takes a Village, Fall Prevention and Age-Friendly Communities, facilitated by the Public Health Agency of Canada in partnership with the Fall Prevention Community of Practice. My name is Lindsay Toth. I'm a consultant with the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation, and I will be attending to the chat box as well as your technological needs during the webinar. The Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation, or ONF, sponsors the Fall Prevention Community of Practice and its online communication platform, Loop. Loop is a place where fall prevention practitioners network, find answers, and work together. Visit us at fallsloop.com or shootloop.com en français. This webinar technology consists of two parts. The audio is provided through a telephone conference line, and the visuals are provided through a web platform. Today we have simultaneous translation of the webinar into French. If you have questions about the technology at any time during this presentation, please type them into the chat box located on the left-hand side of your screen. We will work with you to resolve technical issues as soon as possible. This webinar will contain opportunities for participation. There will be online polls, which you answer right on your screen, and a question and answer period at the end. If you have topic-related questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box. Everyone is in listen-only mode, so you will not be able to ask questions over the phone for this webinar. During the Q&A, questions will be read aloud for the presenters to answer. The webinar is being recorded, and a YouTube link will be sent to all participants in a week or so, along with the presentation slides. So now we'd like to do our first poll. If you could let us know what province or territory you are joining from today. A few more seconds to get your answers in. All right, I'm closing the poll. So it seems that the majority of our participants are joining from Ontario today, 70% of them. But we also have people online from Alberta, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Maritime provinces. Okay, I would now like to introduce our moderator for the webinar, Natasha Curran from the Public Health Agency of Canada. Natasha, you can take it away now.
Thank you, Lindsay, and welcome to everyone who has joined us on the webinar today. My name is Natasha Curran, and I am the manager with Division of Aging, Seniors, and Dementia at the Public Health Agency of Canada. I'd like to say a few words on behalf of the agency before turning it over to our presenters. But for a quick outline of what we're looking at the moment for the day. So we're going to be first setting the context in terms of what is an age-friendly community, and looking then to speak to what is fall prevention for older adults and how do these intersect, before we move into very specific examples provided by our experts coming to us from Northeast Ontario and from Saanich, BC. Then we'll sort of chat a little bit about what are these opportunities that we can talk about, and we want to hear from you very much and have a discussion with questions and answers to know what are you guys doing, what is working, and what could we look to in the future to try and improve all of our practices. We will save some time at the end for that discussion so you can hear about it. But in the interim, I'll get started with talking about setting the context about what is an AFC. So over the past 10 years or so, the Public Health Agency of Canada has been working closely with provinces, the World Health Organization, and other key stakeholders to encourage and support communities to become age-friendly. And the goal of age-friendly communities, or an AFC model, is to help older people of varying needs and capacities enjoy a healthy and safe quality of life and to stay involved in all aspects of their communities. Now this dovetails nicely with another priority public health issue for us, which is namely fall prevention. And as many of you know, falls are actually the leading cause of injury-related hospitalizations among Canadian seniors. So between 20 and 30% of seniors fall each year, and falls are the direct cause of 95% of all hip fractures. And very upsettingly, 20% of seniors die within a year of a hip fracture. Falls can also lead to negative mental health outcomes such as fear of falling, loss of autonomy and greater isolation, confusion, immobilization, and depression. In addition to the negative physical and mental health consequences of falling, there are also significant associated costs to the healthcare system and society at large. So, given the importance of setting up our communities to promote health and prevent injury, I'm excited to participate in this webinar today that explores the crosswalks between fall prevention and AFC. Before we get into the excellent examples that we have today of how communities are linking their fall prevention efforts with age-friendly work, as I say, I'm going to set a little bit of a context for how these two overlap. So I recognize that the majority of you listening today may already have a good working knowledge of what age-friendly communities are and how they operate. However, for the benefit of those who do not, I'm going to briefly recap the basic concepts of AFC. In a nutshell, as I said earlier, AFC encourages active aging by optimizing opportunities for health and participation as well as security to enhance quality of life as people age. So what it means is that policies, services, and structures related to both the physical and social environment are designed to help seniors age actively, or in other words, the community is set up to help seniors live as well as they can. So created by the World Health Organization, or the WHO, with help from the agency, almost 10 years ago, the AFC concept incorporates 8 domains of community life that are important to healthy aging. And you can see these on the little flower image that comes directly from the WHO. And apologies to those who are following us in French. This is an image that came right from the WHO, so it's not available in the other language. But essentially what we're looking at are outdoor spaces and buildings, transportation, housing, respect and social inclusion, social participation, communication and information, civic participation and employment, community supports, and health services. And many of you will recognize in these that these are the social determinants of health. Age-friendly communities, or AFC initiatives, are actually now being undertaken in over 1,200 communities in all 10 provinces across Canada. And it's part of an existing global movement involving communities across 33 countries in the world. So it's quite exciting. So we have a very keen mandate to promote AFC so that older Canadians can continue to participate fully in their communities. To do that, we've been working with the WHO and the provinces and territories, like I said, and we also have an agreed upon pan-Canadian age-friendly community milestones that communities can follow to successfully implement the AFC model in Canada, as well as a set of indicators to measure success in becoming age-friendly. We will certainly be happy to share those tools and resources through the reference pages at the end of the slides that you'll have access to. Most importantly for today's discussion, though, is that key elements of a community's physical environment, such as outdoor spaces and buildings, including in the home, have a strong influence on personal mobility and safety from injury. In terms of the agency's role in fall prevention, the federal government recognizes that falls are one of the most costly and complex injury issues facing seniors, to speak to those, the stats that I had provided earlier. And so we address falls and injury through surveillance of injury risks, trends and patterns, and providing that information to healthcare professionals. We promote what works by identifying and sharing best practices, and we develop tools and resources for the public in general that are available free of charge to raise awareness of what you can do to help at least prevent an injury-causing fall. And in 2014, we released the Seniors Falls in Canada second report, which gave very much surveillance data about what puts seniors at risk of falling, as well as what kind of interventions work for whom and in what setting. Now, we continue to try and increase the knowledge about the factors that contribute to falls. As I said, we have the materials, but it also speaks to what we're doing here today, because we recognize that there's actually an awful lot of overlap between AFC and fall prevention. So the slide that you have before you illustrates in a very general manner that there are some natural linkages between the AFC domains that we spoke about earlier that the WHO had developed and the key risk factors for falls that we see among seniors. So you'll see the risk factors for falls are socioeconomic, environmental, biologic or intrinsic, and behavioral. some of the more obvious domains that link with fall prevention are the ones that touch on environmental or socioeconomic fall risk factors, right? So you can obviously see that if a sidewalk isn't well maintained, that's going to be a huge risk factor. Another example would be that positive changes in housing conditions or urban planning and public transportation systems have the potential to also reduce injury that might occur in those scenarios. And if public transportation is limited or not age-friendly, or if recreation centers aren't accessible and affordable, they could be discouraged from participating in activities such as public exercise programs, which help prevent injury upon falling. But AFC also intersects in some other sometimes less obvious ways with the behavioral and biological risk factors for injury-causing falls. So in keeping with the concept that the social determinants of health have a direct impact on physical and mental health, AFC interventions can improve seniors' lifestyles and social participation. For example, compelling research exists as to the benefits of exercise, eating well, and keeping hydrated in reducing falls, all of which can be addressed through AFC. As another example, home safety assessments and modifications reduce fall rates through reliance on positively influencing behavioral change. To illustrate these points and for real-life examples of how Canadian communities are making the link between AFC and fall prevention, I will turn it over to our speakers, but first I will introduce them both briefly for you. So we have, today we have the great pleasure of having Wendy Carew from the Northeast Local Health Integration Network presenting on her experiences. She has over 25 years of experience facilitating community-based health promotion strategies in Northern Ontario. She currently works with the Northeast Local Health Integration Network, or a LIN as they're called in Ontario for those of you outside of the province, and system and strategy planning. One of her current assignments is to coordinate the regional fall prevention strategy, the Stay on Your Feet, which follows basically it follows the principles of building healthy public policies such as age-friendly communities. After Wendy, we'll hear from Jerry Tomlanovic, who is coming to us from the Saanich Fire Department as a captain. His background includes a broad range of education and experience. Prior to joining the fire service, Jerry worked in several different federal and provincial government positions across a whole range of various areas. So I think Jerry is coming to us with a lot of experience, although I do sympathize with his federal government experience. Jerry is currently involved as the lead instructor with the Bachelor of Public Safety Administration program at the Justice Institute of BC, and he's an active educator within his department in Saanich. So Wendy, if you don't mind taking it away.
Thank you very much. Next slide, please. I'm really happy to be part of this webinar. And as you'll see, our program is called, or strategy is called, Stay on Your Feet in the Northeast LIN. And I'm really excited to be able to talk about how age-friendly communities and falls prevention from a population-based approach fit together. And as I sat and thought about how these two fit together, I recalled some very early work that I did when I came to the North Bay District Health Unit, it was called that at the time, back in the 90s. And there was a public health nurse there, and she was the lead for what used to be called, for those of you from Ontario and for those who work in public health in Ontario, you may remember the Ontario Public Health Standards used to have a healthy elderly component. And this public health nurse was working in the healthy elderly component, and we were working together. And one of the things that we did, although we didn't call it age-friendly communities, we knew that in order to reduce falls, we had to look at the environment in which our older adults lived. And we actually had, at that time, back in the early 90s, older adults doing surveys of their community, so physically walking the streets to look for where curbs needed to be fixed. And I have very fond memories of the fact that those older adults presented to their local small council and changes were made and sidewalks were fixed. And I thought, you know, we've been at this for quite some time. We're just calling it something different. But back in the early 90s, we were ahead of our time linking falls prevention in age-friendly communities. So we've been at this a while, and I think there's a lot of great work that can be done as we're being more intentional going forward. Next. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Northeast LHIN. I don't want to belabor this, but I wanted to let you know that we're very large in geography but fairly small in population. And you'll see that we have 400,000 square kilometers with only about 565 individuals. About 110,000 of those are our older adult population. And like many of your communities, we're growing older, and we're growing old quite quickly. And I think it's something to be celebrated that our older adult population is growing. The trouble, as was pointed out, is 1/3 of our older adults will fall every year. And we know that our hospitalizations and our rate of fall visits to the ED is actually significantly higher than Ontario. And so we took it upon ourselves to look at the fact that most falls are predictable and preventable. And so there was obviously something we could do about it. Next. So our LHIN actually worked with the public health units probably about 4 years ago now. And we came together to work together as the Stay on Your Feet regional strategy. And this is a best practice from Australia. We use the Ottawa Charter pillars for health promotion, and I'll talk a little bit about those and how those connect nicely with the age-friendly pillars. And we also use the Queensland Full Continuum of Care. So we are in a very unique position here in the Northeast LHIN because our LHIN has invested in the prevention of falls, and we work directly with our 5 health units, many other partners from across the spectrum. And it's interesting because when I saw the title of this webinar, we actually use the title, It Takes a Community to Prevent Falls. And so we definitely live and breathe this and have for approximately the last 3 years. Next. So the Ottawa Charter for Health Promotion is the model that we use to plan and implement the Stay on Your Feet strategy in the Northeast LHIN. And it is based on work that was done in Australia. And the most important thing with this slide is to note that there are 5 main pillars. I see them as the actions that we are taking to intervene and to reduce fall risks and reduce the severity of falls. And you'll recognize these as similar to the domains that were pointed out in terms of the age-friendly. So strengthen community action. We cannot do this unless our older adults and our service providers and anyone who touches the life of an older adult is involved. We need to develop personal skills, not just among older adults, but among their families. We need to change the way things happen within organizations, how they deal with falls prevention, and what knowledge they have in terms of being aware of falls risk. It's interesting, I was in Toronto last week, and I was taking a cab up to go from the south of Toronto to the north of Toronto. And you know, when you're in a cab, oftentimes you'll hear different information going across from the center, the control center, to the drivers. And there was a conversation going on from the center to a driver, and the person at the center was saying, you know, you're picking up an older adult, they're at falls risk, please make sure you help them in and out of the cab. And I thought, well, how appropriate for me to be hearing this, that even within the cab companies, they're being told up front that some of their patrons are at risk of falls and that they need to take special care and, you know, get out of their cab and help the older person in and out. So I thought that was really interesting and very apropos as I'm traveling in the cab. So this model of health promotion also focuses on create supportive environments, and that's where the really important connection comes to the environment in which our older adults live, work, and play. And yes, many of them still work. And there's also many of them who are very interested in playing and enjoying their retirement. The other 2 components, reorienting health services, is really all about making sure that we are integrating into our health service providers' work the prevention of falls. And we do a lot of work with our primary care teams, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And underlying this and surrounding this important work is building healthy public policy. We've been doing Stay on Your Feet in the Northeast for 3 years, And Building Healthy Public Policy has always had under its banner age-friendly communities. And so we have been, for the last 3 years, looking to the age-friendly community movement as one of the most important ways that we're going to create policies and change the systems that where older adults live, work, and play. So we are definitely looking at age-friendly communities as an active partner and something that we would be working on going forward. Next. So this is our model of the full continuum, and I just wanted to point out that for us, Stay on Your Feet is all about making sure that we intervene and ensure prevention of falls at all points in the individual's life stage, whether they're an active older adult who lives at low risk in the community or someone who's frail and high risk living in a long-term care home. I will note that for those of you in Ontario, and actually it doesn't matter where you are, you can use these guidelines, the RNAO just released in last September new and revised guidelines for falls prevention, and these are based on best practices. So if you are working near falls prevention and or age-friendly communities, highly recommend you take a look at those, get a copy, and you can get them from the RNAO website. We will be using those guidelines as we plan for the next 3 years. The good news is we have a funding for another 3 years for our Stay on Your Feet project. So we will continue to do this work and continue to work with age-friendly communities. Next. So we know that older adults are a growing segment of our population. They have many health problems. Many of them are on different medications. We know that most older adults want to remain engaged, productive, and active. One of the things that we know very clearly in the Northeast that many of our older adults suffer from social isolation and loneliness, and there's a lot of interesting research coming out that's really labeling it and identifying loneliness and being isolated as very harmful to your health. So when you look at our map, there are a lot of older adults who live in small communities where their families have moved away in order to find work, yet they stayed in the small community they lived in for their whole lives. So we have a lot of work to do in looking at that social isolation component, and I'll tell you a little bit about how we're going to address that together. So we know that we must change the system. If people are going to be healthy and have active aging and live at home, because most want to stay at home. My father, who was quite ill last year and did pass away, I remember asking him, "Dad, what is your wish? What would you like to see?" And he says, "I want to go home." And that's where he wanted to be, and I know many older adults do. So in order to keep them in their homes, we have a lot of work to do. So we know that in order for us to collaborate and make this kind of system change, we can't do it as individual agencies. And at this point, we can't do it as individual strategies. So here in Ontario, there are a number of different LHINs and public health units who are engaged in falls prevention activities. Some work closely together, some work separately. We know that we have to have an overarching focus on falls prevention, and we're working on trying to get some provincial oversight of the falls prevention work here in Ontario. And the LHINs and the public health units here in Ontario are required by legislation to work together. And so I think this is a great opportunity for those of us involved in this work, whether it's age-friendly, falls prevention, if you're working in public health, you're working in a LHIN, or you touch the life of an older adult. These are the kinds of interactions and programs and strategies that we should all be contributing to make sure that we're all pulling in the same direction and we're not reinventing. Next. So this is just a quick map of the age-friendly communities that I know of in the Northeast LHIN. I'm part of a Northern Ontario age-friendly network. And so we have a teleconference every couple of months, and we just talk about what's going on. we have at least 14 different communities in what we call the Northeast LHIN that are working towards becoming age-friendly. Many of them have funding to do that work. Others of them are doing it despite not having funding. And so we are really fortunate that we have a Northeastern reach because we work with all 5 public health units, and we have an official partnership with all 5 public health units. And so we're able to connect with all of these different age-friendly communities and work together and identify where the common ground is. Next. So this is a quick slide that I put together to show where the age-friendly domains and stay on your feet pillars overlap. And so there's some really strong connections, and I think it's consistent with what was presented at the very beginning, is the pillars themselves are really actions. These are our collective actions we need to take together. We need to be working on this together. We need to move these kinds of initiatives together forward. And so I've given you some examples. So when you look at the domains of social participation, respect and social isolation, civic participation and employment, they are really very connected, but not only connected, but connected to what we're working on in strength and community action. And so here's some examples of what we're doing. We have local Stay on Your Feet coalitions. And what's happening is where there is an age-friendly initiative, sometimes there's cross-appointees. So within the City of North Bay, I can speak to that age-friendly initiative because I'm part of the committee. The public health staff, who is the lead for the age-friendly or the co-lead for age-friendly communities, is also part of the Stay on Your Feet coalition. So we are looking at how do we cross over and make sure that there's connections there. So that's a really good example of one of the ways that we've been starting to, I guess, cross-pollinate, for lack of a better word. So we also have Rising Stars. It's a troupe of older adults who present skits all over the Northeast, and there's a troupe in almost every one of our major communities. So when you look at develop personal skills, it links best with your communication and your information section. So within Stay on Your Feet, we offer free exercise classes and falls prevention classes for older adults where they learn about what they need to do and what they can do to prevent a fall and to build their strength, flexibility, and balance. So you can see that the pillars that we use in Stay on Your Feet are very consistent with the domains, and there's some really nice connection and commonality between them. And the base of all of this is really about, as we work collectively, we're going to change healthy public policy. And we were really excited when our Parks and Rec person came to our age-friendly committee meeting in North Bay and said, we're going to be refurbishing a park. How can we make it age-friendly? And so that was a great step for us, and we're very excited that we're making those connections. So next slide, please. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure I shared with you, I've been doing this work for many, many years. And one of the things you hear over and over, and I'm sure many of you say, oh, I'm doing falls prevention. How can I also do age-friendly? I really don't have time for that. And that's often, we get a little overwhelmed by the breadth of all of this work because of very, very large projects. What I would recommend, it's not that your time is limited. Yes, you have limited time, but your actions don't have to be limited. And I really encourage you to be very intentional about making those connections. It's not that we have to take on everything, but start with something that you can work on together that is very common, that you can get some success with. So even though your time may be limited, your actions don't have to be. Next. Lindsay, next? Okay, thanks. Here's some examples of what we've been doing in the North and in some of our areas. So in the North, I said we have an age-friendly community network. We also have senior-friendly hospitals. So there's a fairly significant move within improving quality care in Ontario through the senior-friendly care framework. And so you can see how those two initiatives themselves link to the domains as well as to the pillars. Within North Bay, we've been working, there'll be a third year coming up, where we've actually hosted together a Seniors Expo. So bringing older adults together, raising awareness, talking about what are the issues, and identifying some of the areas we need to work on. One of the things that's happening, which I think is a really very simple but really important step, is our Stay on Your Feet strategy is now doing the work plans. And the age-friendly community has a work plan. And social isolation and social inclusion are on both of those work plans. So in order to move it forward, it has been incorporated into the Stay on Your Feet work plan. And so now we're starting to meld our work plans together, because it doesn't make sense to reinvent. So you'll see in Timmins there's some aging expos and some joint applications going on. In St. Charles they're doing seniors fairs together, and they're presenting Rising Troop presentations. Temiskaming Shores, active aging newspaper series, so collaborating on awareness and communication and information out to the community, as well as supporting some indoor walking programs. So here are some of the examples of what we've been able to do together. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, as we have another 3 years moving forward in order to connect Stay on Your Feet, the falls prevention, with Age Friendly. Next. So one of the things that's important is you don't want to reinvent the wheel, just realign it. There are a lot of common ground between age-friendly communities and falls prevention. There's a lot of interest in the falls prevention work for those in Ontario through the LINs. And public health units in Ontario are instrumental in getting the work in falls prevention going. They have it as part of their mandate. And LINs and public health units are now required to work together. So falls prevention is a really good way for LINs and public health units to work together. We've demonstrated that. And so it's really about finding that common ground and not duplicating work, because no one wants to see that happen. And these are the opportunities we have to make sure it doesn't happen. Next. And so my recommendations are to focus on something basically that is learning. So you'll see that we've been really learning together, so trying to understand each other's mandate and where the common ground is. We've identified some small things that we can work on together that has a tangible beginning and an end. So a health fair, yes, it's a lot of work, but it's something that can be done together, and there's a lot of common ground for that. In fact, now our older adults are asking, when's the next expo? When's the next expo? So it's something that they're looking forward to. And I wanted to reinforce in Ontario, and I suspect this is very similar for those of you who live in other parts of Canada, that public health units, whatever they may be called, are very key partners in falls prevention and age-friendly communities. We need to also recognize that there's variable status. There's all sorts of differences in terms of where communities are at. Even for us in our Northeast LIN, different stages of development for both age-friendly and our Stay on Your Feet strategies. And look for possibilities of cross-appointments. So age-friendly and Stay on Your Feet, we've identified where we can actually have the people come to our meetings and we go to their meetings. It seems simple, but it's a really wonderful way to start to identify the common ground and to talk about things that make sense to do together. And remember our history. And as a public health practitioner, I remember that public health really started many years ago, and some of the most important changes in the health of the communities has not been medical advancements at all. It has been about changing the community and the characteristics of the community in which we live. So for example, improving sanitation and reducing overcrowding really helps reduce infectious disease rates. So just imagine what we can do by creating healthy communities and supporting falls prevention in those communities where older adults live, learn, work, and play. Imagine the change that we can make. So I encourage you to talk to your age-friendly community groups if you're falls prevention, and vice versa. And remember, it's not that you don't have the time. You may be limited in time, but you don't have to be limited in the action you take. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to pass it on to my new colleague, Jerry.
Hello, everyone. Really happy to be a part of the day today, and actually getting an opportunity to give you some insight into what we're doing out here in BC, in particular Saanich, which is a smaller community on Vancouver Island. A lot of what we've been talking about today is basically my day-to-day. I see slips and falls on a regular basis, and we're not happy with that. We've embraced this messaging, and we are looking to do stuff on a more local level. But the challenge for us is to get people to not only hear the message, but to actually do something with it. If I hear one thing every day, it's I never thought that would happen to me, and two, it happened so quick. So it's really just getting people thinking about it from a different perspective. And I'll give you a good example. When we talk about home escape planning, I think we can all agree that it's a great idea. It's very similar to a fire drill in school. And when I suggest to people that schools were thinking about taking fire drills out of the curriculum, it was instant feedback, negative feedback. And of course they're not. But my next question was always, well, how many of us practice a fire drill at home? And it was almost always silence. And the reason for that was not because they didn't believe the fire messaging, but they felt like they were getting it somewhere else and that was good enough. But it's different. When kids hear a message and they practice it like they do in the school system, they're able to retain that and they're able to do something with it when that actually happens. When it happens at home, they're in a different situation. It's a different sound. It's a different message as far as what they're supposed to do. And 2020 and Dateline have done numerous studies that say if you don't practice what you're preaching, you really don't retain that information. And it's quite shocking what the results of that have been. So when we phrase it differently and we're talking inside people's homes, they really get that message from a different perspective. And I think that highlights what my conversation about seniors and fall prevention is going to talk about today. We need to get people listening from a different perspective. In Saanich, the World Health Organization released a policy framework on aging in 2002, and part of that was to support communities in developing and strengthening health and social policies in that aging world. And this policy framework recognizes that older people face increasing challenges as a result of sensory, physiological, and other changes that age and the aging process involve. In 2006, we were selected by the WHO to participate in this worldwide project. And over the course of 2 years since that time, we had developed what we called Project Saanich, Global Age Cities. And the outcome of that were 60 recommendations that are far and above what I'm going to be talking about today. But part of those involved the fire department and things that we could be doing to participate in that. From a local perspective, Saanich is the largest municipality on Vancouver Island, and we're the 7th largest in BC. Now, we do have two colleges and a university which alter that population quite significantly during the school year. It goes up about 40,000, which affects it's a transient population, but it certainly affects our day-to-day. Fairly large municipality, 103 square kilometers, numerous recreation centers, golf courses, parks, and trails. So it's a fairly diverse environment in Saanich. More specifically, though, we are home to 23,715 people that are age 65 and older. They account for more than 21% of our population. And with that said, we're also trying to prepare ourselves for changes that would be difficult for any signal organization to control and govern. In addition to our Global Cities project that I spoke about earlier, we have consistently prepared an active aging strategy through our Parks and Recreations Department. And our latest plan was a direct result of 18 months' worth of work, involved 2,400 participants, and resulted in more than 89 action items that are going to channel our activities over the next 5 years, from 2017 to 2022. And all of this is designed to promote Saanich as a community where all adults can engage in meaningful social, cultural, and recreational experiences. I'm a little bit biased, of course, but I strongly believe that Saanich is really progressive in terms of fall and aging strategies. So to put this into more perspective, the fire department that I'm involved with responds to more than 6,000 calls a year for service. And approximately 250 of these are fire-related. Now that's an average of 1 every day and a half. So part of my discussion today isn't just about what we're doing in terms of slips and falls, it's also what we're doing in terms of fire prevention and assisting seniors in their homes with regards to fire prevention. In BC, it's closer to 15,000 admissions to hospitals for fall-related injuries every year. And that's day to day for me. Like I say, this is boots on the ground, and we're seeing people who have fallen and sometimes not just laid there, but they've actually laid there for days because that support network isn't in place. So again, something that we're really embracing and trying to develop a local solution for. What's even more concerning for us is the 800 direct and indirect deaths that are attributed to falls. That's certainly significant. So what does it mean? Well, falls are having a lasting and devastating impact. That's a theme that we seem to be hearing across the board today, and this impact is even in our community. 30% of people over the age of 65 are experiencing a fall every year. And again, the things that I hear the most, never thought it would happen to me, and it happens so fast. It takes about 1 second to go from a standing to a falling position, so very, very quickly. What it means to us in Saanich is that we feel it's possible to reduce this risk by modifying behavior, habits, and our day-to-day environment. And for us, it's more than just awareness. It's getting out into people's homes, working with them in their environments, and making changes to things that they can see, feel, and touch. So that local perspective really makes a difference in terms of our messaging. In terms of priority for the fire department, we made it a priority in 2011. We titled it the Seniors Fall Prevention and Fire Safety Strategy. It's still very active and regularly requested from seniors groups across the city. But up until 2011, we weren't even talking about slips and falls. It was all about fire prevention. We did include a small segment of it in terms of just a basic understanding of some of the presentations we would do, but we didn't have any content around this topic to speak of. So over the course of several months back in 2011, we prepared a detailed presentation with notes based on discussions with several key stakeholders in the area, and primarily the Seniors Resource Centers. Lifeline Canada was a huge help to us, and of course various healthcare professionals in the Vancouver Island Health Authority, as well as significant online research. And like I said before, it's not new material, it's getting people to see it and embrace it from a different perspective, to actually do something about it. It's that personalization of it. Once we developed what we felt was a presentation that we could take out and speak to people directly with, we had to now actually promote that in the area. And again, we contacted all of the resource centers, the print media that included seniors, all of our community associations. We have 18 that represent all of the municipality of Saanich. They have their distribution list. They were very, very accommodating. Seniors outreach programming was another popular area that we would enter much of our information. And then lastly, we actually partnered up with Blockwatch. Now this is a neighborhood organization that represents thousands of homes in Saanich, and we were able to provide material to Blockwatch and then promote our presentations directly through them. So using these communication networks that were already set up, we're able to actually get into people's homes, and it's made a big difference for us. To look at some of the highlights of what we've been talking about over the past 6 years, we've conducted 81 dedicated seniors presentations, and we average about 200 participants a year. So overall, we've talked to more than 1,600 seniors in homes, and part of that presentation is a parallel campaign to make sure that every home in Saanich has a smoke alarm. So we offer free smoke alarms, free install of smoke alarms, free batteries, and these are simply request one or promote it through radio or TV. And in that same year, same series of years, we installed more than 306 smoke alarms in residences, and more than 80% of those went into seniors' homes over the age of 65. Hugely successful for us. And while we're there installing a smoke alarm, whether it was based on a son calling about his grandma or a parent or from the senior themselves, we actually do a home inspection. And part of that home inspection gets into some of the things that I'm going to talk about soon, and that's like trip hazards and just those kinds of things that we can do to reduce falls in homes. And the feedback up to this point has been outstanding. It's been really, really positive. So all of this brings me up to our messaging, and we start off this messaging by talking with folks from a visual perspective, and I'll bring a set of blocks with me, and it's a stack of 6. And as I talk about what we call the tower of risk, we say to people that the natural process of aging includes changes in abilities, and that these changes affect each person differently, and they involve different risks. But in the fire department, we think of these risks as blocks. And the more of these blocks you have in your lifestyle, the greater the likelihood of the blocks falling over. So I travel with that set. And each time I speak about one of these blocks, I'll stack another block on top of each other. And visually, it gets to be more unstable as it rises. It's something that people can really connect with. That first block that I speak about is balance. And balance is a learned skill that we develop as toddlers. It's a complex function involving eyes, ears, muscular strength, and joint flexibility. And any one of these can change as a result of aging. And we all know that poor balance affects mobility. As well, a decline in equilibrium can also make it more difficult for folks to recover and balance from a slip or trip, and can very easily become a fall. The second block I'll stack up is mobility issues, and these refer to how we walk and the way we control our trunk. The speed of walking, how high the heels are lifted, the length of our stride, all of these things again change with age. And if we're not standing straight, we commonly develop pains. Often to relieve these pains, we'll take medications. As we age, we develop conditions which require medication. So we're now taking several medications. And multiple medications can really affect people, again, differently in different ways. So again, I'm stacking that next block up. Our fourth block is low blood pressure. And this occurs when we go from a sitting to a standing position, or from a lying to a sitting position. Having that blood pressure drop can really interfere again with our balance, our coordination, and our vision, which all increase the likelihood of a fall. So again, stacking that next block up, you can start to see that tower of risk getting more unstable. Our fifth block that we stack up is what we call sensory deficits. So any problems with sensation, whether it's in the eyes, the ears, or the feet, all increase the risk of a fall. We all know people that with vision, it can take longer for the eyes to adjust from a dark light to a light room, or from a light room to a dark room. That decline in depth perception can make it difficult to judge distances, and sensitivity to heat and pressure decreases may make it more difficult for us to detect changes in ground surfaces. Sense of smell, again, if that's diminishing, it can make it more difficult to, in my business, detect leaking gas or even the smell of smoke. And hearing loss can result in difficulties with telephones. So if we don't hear it, maybe we're hearing it on the fourth ring. Now we're rushing to get it. It's just increasing that sense of that trip hazard again. And with smoke alarms, if you can't hear them, that's a real hazard for us, particularly in my business. The final block is home hazards. And as we age, we have some combination of these bodily characteristics, this tower of risk. They don't just happen overnight, and we slowly adjust to that. But with that said, we also expect we can navigate through our home like we used to. And part of what we try to do with folks in our talks and in our homes is to have a look at their homes from a fresh perspective. Let's look at it from a new set of eyes. You'd be amazed at how much stuff people can accumulate over the years, and it's become a real trip hazard for people. So just getting in, doing a home inspection, working with them one-on-one, it personalizes that, and it really makes that message more meaningful. When we are in homes, we like to focus with people on 3 specific areas: stairs, bathrooms, and bedrooms. For us, just through our call volume, we've been able to identify that about 15% of the falls that we go to occur on stairs. And I think we can all agree that we travel on at least one set of stairs every day. The reason that they are a high-risk area is because they're an uneven surface. And quite often when we have railings, we only have them on the one side and it's too far to use the railing on the other side. So the impact of this, particularly when we start to add the other risk factors in it, makes stairs a very common area for us to respond to in terms of calls. A second area that we spend a lot of time talking to folks about is the bathroom, and that's because it's an area where there's slip hazards such as water and tubs and things of that nature. So when we talk bathrooms, that's an area where folks can spend an awful lot of money in a really quick way to to modify it, and that's not what we're looking to do. We're looking for things like grab bars and rugs that with rubberized coatings on the bottom, things that can make a real difference that are cost effective. And the last area that we spend time talking with folks on is the bedroom. And the reason for this is that's where we go to relax. It's to sleep. We put our guard down. When we lie down, we've been down for a period of time, and we decide that we need to get up to go to the washroom, particularly in the middle of the night. The older you get, the more those head rushes you get. So having proper lighting, avoiding shoes at the bottoms of beds, and that lighting is not only in the bedroom but in the hallway into the bathroom, provides that clear path which lets us get to where we need to go. As we get into some of the other messaging, I'm not going to go through everything because that's not the intent of this presentation here, but much of our messaging focuses on just clearing the way. Like I say, over time we can accumulate so much stuff that we've actually just created a small curvy path for ourselves to get through. Having handrails going up and down stairs, having handrails in bathrooms can make that process so much easier. Considering putting bells on our pets. They love to be at the bottom of our feet, particularly when we're watching TV, and getting in the way is a common trip hazard for us. Consider multiple cordless phones. It's another way of preventing from having to rush to catch that one phone that's in the kitchen when you're 3 bedrooms away. And just moving through the list, improving lighting, really, really important for folks to have those night lights, not only in bedrooms, like I say, but in hallways and bathrooms. Really light up that way for yourself. Make it that much easier to get there. We've talked about bathrooms. We've talked about kitchens a little bit. Organize it in a way that makes it easier for you to get your items where you need them to go. So have a look at your kitchen, again, from that fresh set of eyes. If you're into cupboards that are above your heads, and that's where you keep a lot of your heavy stuff, let's look at reorganizing that kitchen to move things into lower cabinets where they're easier to access and things you get every day. The things that you don't use every day, we can move those into other cabinets that we can keep accessible as well. Canes and walkers, very often when I'm out talking with folks, I see them with canes and walkers, and you'd be amazed at how many people haven't had them assessed after having them for a year or 2 years. And our posture changes, and we're seeing people that are using walkers that are too tall for them and walkers that are too short for them because they haven't been properly assessed for them, not only at the beginning but even over time. So having a look at those things. And shoes are another big one. I mean, when we see folks and we're talking about shoes, these are the kinds of things that we normally think of buying from a fashion perspective. Well, we need to start looking at shoes not so much from a fashion perspective, but from a function perspective. The type of soles that you have, they react differently with the flooring textures that they're walking on, the outside textures. So buying them from that perspective. Physician checkups is also another thing that we really stress with people. It's imperative that individuals speak with their physicians every year, have medication reviews, and let your doctor know if you've had a fall, particularly for no reason. These are things that we need to start having people do on a more regular basis. In terms of of fire prevention messaging on the fire side of things, it's equally important for us. Once we're in the home, we can talk about both aspects of it, slips and falls and fire safety. And for us, the number one cause of fires is in the kitchen. And it's simply because folks will put something on the stove, they'll forget about it, and it becomes unattended cooking. And we see hundreds of kitchen fires a year as a result of this. And of course, as we age, our memory isn't always what it used to be. So having reminders or not leaving the kitchen unattended is something that we really get talking with people about. As well as little things like using pot handles for putting fires out as opposed to pot lids for putting out fires. Very, very effective. We demonstrate that in the home. We show them how easy it is to do. And again, attaching that personal message in the home really makes it more retainable for folks. Smoke alarms, very, very important. Again, we go back to Saanich is committed to having a smoke alarm in every home. And we've replaced, I know it says 304 here, but we've actually replaced 306 in the last 6 years. And we do get an awful lot of calls from not only seniors, but from kids of seniors who are concerned about their parents who may live in another city, and they just want to have the fire department go over and make sure that everything is working as it should be. And if it's not, then we go ahead and replace that free of charge with the install. In terms of other types of messaging, even though the kitchens are our number one area for fires, smoking in bed is still our number one cause of fire death in the province, and it's something that we attach a lot of messaging to. We still feel like people are doing it, and it's a message that we need to reinforce. Not using planters is a big one for us. I'm not sure if people realize how much organic material there is in planters, particularly when they're out on a deck and they're using that as an ashtray. That'll simmer over time, and we do see a number of fires in that way there. Home heating, talking about carbon monoxide detectors, and again, coming back to escape planning. It's one of these areas where everybody thinks that it's their home, they can get out of it, and it's not really something that they need to practice, is really short-sighted. I mean, it's rare that you'd see a sports team pick up a soccer ball, go to the middle of a field, and just talk about playing soccer. Practicing it is the very best way to put that message into a permanent part of your brain. Practice, practice, practice. It's really what we stress here. And getting into people's homes, looking at the various ways that they would escape from that home, and then having them practice that has again been very successful for us in the fire department. So for us, we're really a boots on the ground organization. We're talking to hundreds of people every year, and we're talking to them in their homes. I keep coming back to that same theme. It's in their homes. It's local. It's personal, and it's been very successful for us. But we also want to broaden that now into other content areas. We do a significant number of seniors presentations every year, but by adding that seniors component to other presentations, I think we can make that really increase those numbers. So not only when we're talking to seniors, if we're talking to fire safety in the home with families or hoarding or any other presentation that we deal with, having a small slip and falls component to that broadens that message that much farther. So even if the person in there isn't the audience, they may have a mother or father in the same city that they can relay this information to and use that as a means to check up on their status. We're also looking at putting together some video segments on YouTube that we can have on our website that gets this messaging out when we're not able to. People can click it, they can access it any time of the day or night, and using more of this information with our neighboring jurisdictions. Part of the South Island includes Victoria to our south, Oak Bay, and the Esquimalt, which are, grand total we make up about 400,000 population strong. And having a consistent message go across the radio stations just embraces that much further and increases our chances of success region-wide versus just city-wide. So with that said, very happy to, like I say, be involved in the webinar today, and happy to hear from anybody on what they're doing across the country and ways that we can modify or change what we're doing here. With that point, now I'd like to turn it back over to Natasha for finishing up.
Thank you, Jerry and Wendy. Those were great presentations, and my goodness, I am just blown away by the amount of work that is being done at a grassroots level that's going to have such an impact on the population. It's really incredible. I want to speak to some opportunities that we can see from these two presentations today before we get on to the actual discussion period. But in the interim, while I'm speaking, please do feel free to put in your questions that you may have as well into the chat box, and we'll respond to those. So what I certainly have heard from you both, and Wendy, you specifically called it out as well, is the necessity to leverage existing and complementary networks. Essentially making those intentional cross-linkages to maximize the time that we have available to us. As you say, none of us has a lot of time in our jobs, and so finding ways to really get at the heart of what we're doing in the most efficient manner is very appropriate. And I think that you've given some great examples of how that's been done in terms of strengthening and coordinating common messaging and awareness around fall prevention. So for example, I know that the Northeast Glen and across Ontario in particular, but increasingly across the country, there's a lot more action around fall prevention months in November each year to try and really raise awareness during that time period. There's also lots of opportunities for linkages and opportunities between AFC approaches and the fall prevention that meets both mandates, which I think both of your presentations very much did outline and touch on. And actually what's interesting is when we say age-friendly communities, Wendy had spoken about how hospitals are trying to increase their age-friendliness as well. And I know that's something a lot of ER rooms also are considering in trauma centers, how to set it up for older adults in a way that's friendly. And so what we're hearing is the terminology age-friendly hospitals and even age-friendly universities. So it's not just a concept of a community in terms of a small group of individuals. It actually can be quite large. It can be a city, a community, an organization, you name it. It's really getting quite a bit of pickup. I also like the fact that you pointed out that public health interventions often are most effective when they're quite upstream as opposed to, so it's not so much that it's disease treatment, but it's prevention, right? So fixing the crowded housing and sewage systems has huge effects on outcome of disease, and that's very true of injury as well. So fixing the housing, fixing the ability to get to an optometrist to have your eyes checked, and making sure everybody's included in that somehow, those are very important steps to be taken to try and address injury prevention and also to advance age-friendly. And one thing we always say is that an age-friendly community is not just specific to helping older adults, it helps everybody across the life course because it's inclusive of all. In Jerry's specific example, I think that it's fantastic to really see how that leveraging of complementary interests really can be put into play. So bringing fire safety and fall safety together into one is an incredible advantage that I know that Jerry is a leader in this for sure. And there are other fire departments across the country as well as paramedics who are really trying to mimic this type of approach and get in the door into people's houses to really help address a few issues that everyone can benefit from. I love the fabulous example of using visual blocks to help explain to people as well how these all kind of add up and really are necessary. And one thing I think is quite heartening is the fact that these days, I know Jerry, you said you can spend a lot of money on grab bars and shoes, and these can be very practical items. What is nice to see is in the market now, there's an increasing amount of variety in very safe and effective grab bars, shoes, you name it, that are actually also appealing to look at. So you're not necessarily always looking at the same clunky old shoes or that horribly ugly plastic grab bar that doesn't match the rest of your decor in your bathroom. Now there's more and more options, and I'm I foresee that that'll just only increase as time goes on. One of the things that the Public Health Agency of Canada had helped give a webinar on a while back was actually some work that the Toronto Rehab Institute is doing on putting out a Canadian site using Canadian products called ratemytreads.com, and they actually are testing very practical winter boots and possibly moving on to others that actually have better slip resistance. So these are products being put on the market by companies like Mark's Work Warehouse. So they're very practical products that are now becoming more and more available to all. And again, I personally just want to say a big thank you to Jerry for mentioning the potlets. I actually didn't know that, and now I'm going to keep that in my own mind for my own house safety. So essentially those are some of the opportunities, and I know we're going to open it up to discussion and Q&A. And I'm sure some of you have specific questions to the presenters that I'd love to answer. And in the meantime as well, I'm going to start the conversation off that we'd like to have even after if we have some time, asking everybody on the phone and on the lines, are you currently linking fall prevention strategies with your local AFC initiatives? And if so, can you share some of your own experiences and lessons learned? Or if not, have you learned anything here today that might be able to facilitate that? So those are the questions that I'll sort of put out there to get going, but we do have a couple to start with. So Janice has been asking specifically to, I think this is more to Jerry, how do you get the message to the individuals? Do people ask you to come to their homes? Are you referred to their home? Would you be able to answer that?
Yes, absolutely. It comes from a variety of sources, really. One of our main sources is the use of the community associations distribution list. So they maintain that distribution list, and what we'll do is we'll send them a one-page description of what we can do, and those sorts of things, and they'll fan that out to their various community association members, and then they'll contact us directly from that. And another method is to use the Block Watch distribution list. Again, we'll send them that one page. It's their distribution list. They fan it out, and people contact us directly. It's been hugely successful for us, and we do an average of 3 to 5 presentations, Block Watch specifically alone, a month. And we get them. What we're trying to do is get them thinking not necessarily in terms of Block Watch from a police perspective on crime and things like that, but treating it more like a neighborhood. So if you have seniors in your neighborhood, check up on them from time to time and get used to their routines as well. We're not asking you to keep an eye on them, but if you usually see your senior every morning around 11, that's part of their routine, and you haven't seen them for 2 days, and if that's unusual, maybe just go and check up on them. So it's trying to embrace it from a larger, more neighborhood perspective than just simply a home perspective.
Thank you. And Daphne asks actually further to that, is this program that you're doing the Remembering When Fire and Fall Prevention program? She also wants to know, is it volunteers who are doing the assessments?
No, it's modified from the Remembering When. They use 8 slip and fall not initiatives, but tips, and then 8 fire prevention tips. So we've used some of that because, like I've said, it's the information. It's not new information. When we talk about slips and falls, if you go back 10 years, it's the same kinds of information. It's just how we're presenting it, and it's being promoted. And for us, that I don't want to call it the hook, but the hook is really personalizing it to individuals and having these presentations in their homes versus larger community centers where it really just becomes they're just listening. They're not actually doing anything with it. For us, it's that transition to that smaller 2 or 3 home perspective, home inspections, and then doing something while we're there, and that's been a really positive feedback for us.
Thank you. So Sarah is saying that she'd love to see the YouTube video segments, and she's happy to share this out and other resources via the Ontario Age-Friendly Communities list where appropriate. Sarah, we'd be very happy if you could do that. I think the more the merrier, and the better we get this message out, the more people will be able to benefit from it. So thank you very much. We'll definitely share those. And we will, of course, Lindsay had mentioned earlier on the webinar that the materials will all be made available after the call, or after the webinar, pardon me. But I did just want to note as well that there's a couple of specific questions about stats. So Janice is asking, Jerry, can I have the source of the quotes about the 15,000 admissions in BC due to falls?
Yeah, I'll have to get. I don't have them on hand with me right now, but I can certainly provide those.
Absolutely. And Janice also asks me if the figures, the 95% of hip fractures from falls, that sort of information that I provided from the Seniors Falls in Canada second report or another source. The majority of those are in fact in the Seniors Falls in Canada second report, and that link is in the references at the end. And I believe that some of the information about falls, goodness gracious, the hip fractures was some work done by Vicki Scott, so I'll make sure that you get that as well. Jeanette is asking us, should dementia-friendly be included as well? And I will also answer that one. Jeanette, it's actually a fabulous question because there's more and more discussion these days about dementia-friendly communities and how they intersect with age-friendly communities. And the overall concept is that age-friendly communities is in fact inclusive of the concepts of dementia-friendly communities, and that's sort of how we approach it from the federal perspective. And I know the WHO is also trying to align that work to make sure that there's no need for diverse approaches, that the two can be married very nicely so that it brings it in. So thank you for bringing that up. I don't have anything specific, but if you have more questions about that, please don't hesitate to follow up on that question. Julia asks, Jerry, do you have any suggestions on how you would address any pushback on integrating fall prevention education and intervention for seniors in sectors like yours, such as it's not a part of my job description?
We haven't had any pushback. For us, it's because it is part of our day-to-day, and we see it. Our management is fully on board. Our counselors are fully on board, and in Saanich, we've been a part of that Age-Friendly Cities project for some time now. So it's difficult for me to speak about that only because we haven't had any pushback. In fact, if anything, it's been more of an embracing perspective here, and so I don't have a lot of suggestions.
Thank you. Certainly, if others do have suggestions or have encountered that and have been able to successfully work with that, if you wouldn't mind putting that into the chat box, I think we could all use that as a learning opportunity. Thanks. Jamie asks, does the LIN, so for you, Wendy, does the LIN have a typical falls prevention exercise program guideline? What is expected in class implementation? Is there an instructor or participant ratio for classes?
Yes, thank you. I can address that for Ontario. In Ontario, in about 2013, a new initiative was rolled out called the Community Exercise and Falls Prevention Initiative. That provided funding for free exercise classes for older adults, and also another section called Falls Prevention classes. Two different streams of opportunities, all provided through funding through the LIN to the service providers in each of the regions. In Ontario, there are 14 LINs. We are LIN number 3, lucky 13. And we provide the funding for those 177 exercise classes to a variety of health service providers across our region. So home and community care, VON, our community health centers, some of our family health teams. And the Ministry of Health here in Ontario actually provided some general information on who the instructors should be. And there should be at least one instructor to 35 individuals. That was the requirement. Now in the Northeast, we're not able to do that. We don't have spaces actually. Most of the time we don't have a room that's big enough to accommodate 35 individuals. So our ratio tends to be more 1 to about a dozen people based on the reports I receive. The falls prevention class, we have 111 of them in our region. We selected a program out of Quebec. It's a Canadian-made program, so it's available in English and in French, which is fabulous for our region, and it's called Stand Up. And the ratio for that class, it's a very specific class, 12 weeks, 2.5 hours a week, includes it includes education each week on the different risk factors, and the ratio for that is 1 instructor to 10 class participants. Over that, we need another instructor or another facilitator, and those facilitators are specifically trained to provide stand-up, and we are working with our public health units across our region, provide the training free of charge on a very regular basis. So that's how we have rolled that component out in our LHIN. Each of the 13 other LHINs have done it a little bit differently, but that's how we've been managing it in the Northeast.
Thank you. Now the question actually which fits for both of you, so you can choose who will go first, but Sherry asks, how many different organizations or agencies do you work with in your respective communities aside from the healthcare and EMS that support the AFC and Fall Prevention objectives?
Wendy?
So besides people from the health sector, I know all of our partners, based on the 5 public health units, we have 5 local Stay on Your Feet coalitions, and at those local levels we look to engage older adults themselves, so volunteers. We also look to make sure your key health system partners are on board, CCAC, in Ontario it's home and community care, and the hospital, long-term care homes. So I don't have the numbers outside of the health sector, but we do need to move beyond the health sector, and that's identified when we look at strengthened community action. One of the ways that we're able to link better with municipalities, social services, parks and rec, is through our links with age-friendly communities. So we don't have enough non-health sector people involved at this point. We are fairly heavy in the health sector, which is a good start, but we do need to move beyond the health sector, make sure that all the other sectors are involved because they do have an important role to play.
Great, thank you. How about you, Jerry? Do you have anything to add to that?
Not a lot. We're, as a local organization, we've tailored that message to take what other people are saying and redistribute that from a different perspective. So we don't have a lot of partnerships with other organizations. We have some with the police department when we're dealing with like hoarding and a few things like that, where we get in and we're talking with them. But other than with our seniors resource centers, it's pretty much a local initiative.
Great. Okay, thank you. Sarah has given us an example in response to our Q&A about how do you currently link fall prevention strategies with local AFC. So in addition to the examples that our presenters gave today, she also notes that the Ontario AFC outreach program that she works with is connected with the Ontario Fall Prevention Community of Practice, which is that loop platform that we're working with today to make sure that this information gets out to you guys. So they're ensuring that way they continue to stay in the know about each other's works and priorities, as well as being able to respond to collaborative opportunities to connect the two. So I think it's a very helpful way, just sort of keeping engaged with others in the field, right? Haley asks, Jerry, is this a pilot project for your area, or is your success rate and decrease in falls being tracked so that this can be a tool that's used through fire departments province-wide and maybe even then nationwide?
Yeah, it is. It's not a pilot project. It's something that we've taken a real interest in promoting back in 2011. And back then, I guess we had looked at it more like a pilot project, like let's just see how it works out for the year. And it was so well embraced by the community that it's just become a part of our day-to-day presentation rotation now. So we don't have any problems promoting it with all of those organizations. But what we haven't done a great job of is tracking the statistics, particularly with fall and fall-related injuries, because that's not something that we maintain. That would be something from the health side of things. What we do know is that the feedback we get from it has been extremely positive in terms of people committing to make changes on a day-to-day basis, not only to their lifestyle but to their environment and things like that. So that's how we've gauged our success, is just more on a qualitative basis than a quantitative basis.
Thank you. And actually, that sort of speaks quite broadly to another question that was coming up from Teresa as well. So actually, Wendy, would you be able to speak to that in terms of have your initiatives been evaluated to determine if there's an impact as well?
Absolutely. Happy to address that. So our Stay on Your Feet strategy, we're just completing this week because this is the end of our fiscal year, our first 3 years together. And we have evaluated. We have an evaluation framework that provides information on population level outcomes. So we're monitoring emergency room visits and monitoring hospitalizations related to falls among the 65 plus. We're also looking at our partnerships and the infrastructure that we've created to support an initiative that is so large and with so many moving parts. So we looked at partnership and infrastructure. And then we also tracked and monitored individual outcomes. So looking at the stand-up classes, for example, we're really proud of the fact that in 3 years, it doesn't sound like a lot, but there are at least 3,500 older adults in the Northeast who have participated in the stand-up class. And it's specifically designed to build strength, balance, and flexibility. And it specifically provides a half an hour each week of direct education on falls prevention. And based on those numbers, not necessarily based on outcomes based on in terms of whether the person falls or not, but we do have good numbers that indicate significant improvements in the way people feel, in their ability to walk around the mall without their cane. So it's anecdotal. Older adults love the class. They want to take it again. So we're working on developing a mechanism to move them from stand up to what we're called still standing. We're pilot testing that right now in a little community called Mattawa, Ontario. And so that should be rolled out next fiscal. So we have been monitoring numbers around risk factors. Certainly it appears that the hospitalization rate is going down. We cannot say statistically that it has anything to do with what we're doing because this is a very large population-based model, and we know that hospitalizations due to a fall have a variety of factors in terms of whether or not you're hospitalized. So we are tracking, we are monitoring, and we are evaluating. We are going to be working actually with Public Health Ontario to revise and renew our evaluation framework to actually make it a bit more rigorous for the next 3 years.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. It also speaks to some of the challenges of assessing the outcomes of upstream health promotion. It's a dilemma that we struggle with regularly and are always seeking to find better ways to do it. I've actually just switched the slide so that in the meantime, while we're addressing the next few questions for the next couple of minutes, if you want to add in what would help you further strengthen your work between AFC and fall prevention. So there's a list there if you want to put that into the chat box and see what would be useful to you. And that's useful for us to know at a policy level as well. Oh, and I believe that's actually, sorry about that, that's actually a doodle poll. So you can just click your answers there if you would like to see something. Now, Bernadette sort of came back to a similar tone that we had earlier. Jerry, did you need to sell the importance of including fall prevention in fire department presentations and home safety assessments to your management? And if so, how did you do it?
We actually didn't. It was something that was promoted to us, I think, initially through counselors. And I believe Judy Brownoff sits on a national council to do with seniors and from our jurisdiction. And she's very progressive in that regard. Our fire chief is very progressive in that regard. So fortunately, we haven't had any roadblocks or obstacles as far as our messaging. For us, it's been one of these things where, like I said, we tested out the pilot project as far as getting into people's homes and talking about it, and it was so successful that it's almost exploded for us, and it's one of our most popular presentations to deal with on a monthly basis.
That's fantastic, and I'm hopeful that today there might be some more. This might trigger some more conversations in boardrooms around the country to get that going as well.
Right.
So Teresa, hopefully we've answered your question about evaluation. Jane has noted that your presentation, Jerry, about preventing falls in seniors' homes is great to share even in elementary schools. And so she said coming from a grandchild might enhance the openness in receiving the information. So there's an interesting concept. Marguerite is noting that with Fall Prevention Month coming up for this November 2018, are either of you two looking at doing some initiatives with community partners? Or can you share if you did a special initiative last year? And Jerry, I know that BC has their own program, so that might not apply so much. But Wendy, do you have anything you could add?
Oh, absolutely. Very pleased to add. We are in Ontario, and the Falls Prevention Month in November is a very important time for us as a community-based strategy with multiple partners and a huge reach across 400,000 square kilometers. So this past year, our work focused really on medication management, and we focused on developing 3 short videos. One was on medication management. They're available in English and French on our Northeast LHIN website. We really wanted to promote the fact that medication management was an important part of what needed to happen for older adults to stay active, healthy, and independent, and most important, on their feet. It was very seriously considered by all of the people we consulted that this was something that had to happen. And so during November, we used that time to promote medication management and to actually air the video on our one TV station we have in the Northeast. Yeah, that's what happens when you live in a rural northern community. And we also celebrated the release of the RNAO Best Practice Guidelines in Ontario and really tried to promote those, because we know that anyone who touches the life of an older adult has an ability to, within their scope of practice, to make a difference. And so those guidelines are really helping us to do that. So we also have a video on, we have some testimonials on why being physically active is good for older adults. So there's some testimonial videos. And we also have a nutrition video that talks about the importance of nutrition for older adults and preventing falls. So we really use that November time when there's a heightened awareness around falls to make sure that we're really doing a lot in the community and engaging with not just our partners, but engaging the general community to better understand that falls are not part of normal aging, that they are typically preventable and predictable, and there are ways that you can reduce your risks.
Great, thank you. And actually, for those of you who aren't familiar with them, the RNAO guidelines are from the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, and we can provide the link to that as well. And it speaks to Jane's comment that discharge planning nurses are a great source of referral for home assessments. So quite possibly an area of linkages for getting a program up and running. Unfortunately, we are very close to the end of time, and I want to turn this back over to Lindsay, our host. I do know that there were some other questions that we weren't able to answer in the conversation today, but we can certainly follow up with you, and thank you all very much for your interest and for your time. Lindsay, would you mind providing some closing remarks?
Absolutely. Okay, so I'd like to thank our presenters, Wendy and Jerry, for a wonderful presentation today. And also thank you to Natasha for moderating, and to the Public Health Agency of Canada for partnering with us to make this event happen. As well, thank you to all of our participants today for joining us and engaging in a great discussion. There were wonderful suggestions for next steps in there, and we are certainly going to review them for feasibility moving forward. So please do not close this window just yet. Please wait until you've been redirected to the next screen, where a brief evaluation survey will launch in your web browser. We'd appreciate if you could take a few moments to provide us some feedback so that we can continue to offer high-quality webinars. As well, for more information about the Fall Prevention Community of Practice, which is a great resource as you continue your learning journey about age-friendly communities and fall prevention, please visit the Loop online communication platform at fallsloop.com. So thank you all, and have a wonderful day. See you next time.